Good morning, Jambo. So I'm just going to do a quick little introduction and then we're going to watch a short clipping from the encounter at Quachahos for 5 minutes. Pardon me? So, I think I can say a couple of minutes. Not that long. And then we are going to listen to, can you hear me? No. Sorry. It's on. Good morning.
There we are. Good morning,
Jambo. So I was saying that this morning, sort of how the day is going to run through. I'm just going to give a quick little introduction and a bit of history around the project. And then we're going to watch Encounter at Quachahos, just 5 minutes of the snip that's relevant to the topic around employment equity. And then we're going to have this lovely panel give us 10 minutes of their time each, and we're going to dialogue a bit. We'll have a quick break, and then we'll come back to break off into smaller groups in circles using talking sticks and some guided questions. And then we'll kind of come back to the larger group. So that's kind of that. So Working While Black came out of community dialogues with JAMA a few years back. The community needed a forum to action issues related to racism in the workplace and employment equity. Working While Black aims to publish anonymous stories of anti-Black racism in the workplace in Nova Scotia. Publishing these stories allows workers in the Black community to know that they are not alone in their experience of racism. The website also serves as a means to circulate these stories beyond the Black community. This is especially important since whites and other Nova Scotians often operate under the mistaken assumption that racism is a thing of the past. The project is a collaboration and partnership with UJAMA, Quachahos Cafe, and Solidarity Halifax. UJAMA is a collaborative and sustainable development initiative. UJAMA takes an integrated, undefined approach to community development with a focus on sustainability of the African Nova Scotian community. Quachahos Cafe is a locally owned cafe operated by myself, Lama Jones. It's located in Fairview, and the cafe has a social justice lens and functions as a politicized space. Its roots stem back to the original Quachahos in the 60s that was co-founded by my father, Dr. Burnley Rocky Jones, and community. And Solidarity Halifax is a membership-based anti-capitalist organization. It aims to create space for respectful dialogue, debate, activism, and education on alternatives to capitalism, organizing to create respectful places for debate on the left. So, since racism is a daily painful reality for many people, in our discussions today we ask that all participants be respectful of others and their lived experience. Too often the burden is put on Black folks and people of color to prove that racism exists. So in this space today, we ask that participants begin with the common understanding that racism continues to pervade our society and that individuals are the best judge of their own realities. So let's have a great working space and shift some ideas around. A few house cleaning things. The bathrooms, if some of you don't know, are down the hall here. We'd ask that if you could put your cell phones on vibrate would be really great. If you're not wanting to be videotaped, so today we will be videotaping the panelists, but hopefully catching some of the dialogue that happens in small circles. If you don't want to be taped, there's a table in the back corner there. You can sit there and you won't be taped. But other than that, if you're sitting in the rest of the area, we're assuming that it's okay to tape you. And if you have to leave early, we have some evaluations. And as we know in community, we don't tend to capture information, and it would be really helpful moving forward and actioning some more things if you could just give us some feedback and even your contact information. And I think that's it. I'm going to pass it over. I don't know if you panelists wouldn't mind. Matt, do you have bios? No. Okay. So I think what will happen would be great if you could introduce yourselves, and then we have a timer here.
Video?
Yes.
Video.
Pardon? Okay. Yeah.
Video?
No, not yet. And then the timer will tell you when it's closer to the time. So encounter at Quachahos Cafe.
It's just like the white man says, I have nothing against the Negro as long as he stays in his place. No, it's very easy for a white man or a white family to come down here and bring a lot of old clothes and say, all you nice poor black people, that's yours. But then he has a vacancy upstairs in his room and it stays for rent. And even though he comes in here and he comes into this club, and that black man over there says that I want to get the apartment to rent, that man wouldn't give him the apartment.
The easiest person to discriminate against is the one that you can see the easiest. The black, the Indian, So, this is true. I'm sick and tired of telling them how I feel. If they want to know how I feel, let them come to me from now on. And let them come down here and see what's wrong and try to do something. I'm through this whole horseshit of going out and telling the white community, look, I feel so bad. I know I'm inferior and this is because so many things have happened to me. I'm not inferior. No,
There comes a time when you can only take so much. You have to vomit if you're pushing things on your throat. And the only way to vomit is right back in his face. That's the only way to understand you.
Let me ask you guys one question. Maybe some of you go through it, 9, maybe 11. And a good 95% of you kids in this area don't even have a summer job. Why? You know what you think that, a lot of people say that, the Negro kids can't get a job. You think that...
Nobody's trying to get any, nobody's trying. Or is it because you know that you're not going to get it? I mean, most of you might have known from the established policy of these business places that it's semi-sex segregation out there. There's no doubt about it. And isn't it that the attitude? Instead, some say don't go on job. Because you can't get it, as they say, the fox can get it, the grapes. And so he says the South. You can't get a job, and so you sort of go into a sort of complacent mood. You can't get it, well, why you forget it? Isn't that the truth?
Oh, I tried one place, he said no, so go back
Halifax is a town that there are a lot of segregationists here. The policy in this neighborhood, as was stated before, has been, look, let's hire whites, and it still exists.
You take all those stores on Gottingen Street there. Now you have, I don't want to name some of the stores, but some of these stores, they'll give a girl a job in the office. But there are quite a few of those stores on Gottingen Street where a lot of you girls buy some of those pretty dresses you're wearing. They won't give you a job to sell.
My sister Janice, the other day went to France, where a lot of us buy records. She went to France for a job. Over the phone, everything was peachy keen. She went down there and she talked to the guy, and everything was peachy keen. Then the woman and the daughter got together, formed a block, and he says, well, look, we'll have to let you know about this. Now, she's got grade 12 with experience on cash, 2.5 years experience at a cash register. So, the next day was Sunday, the next day was Monday. Monday morning at 11 o'clock, she phoned and said, did I get the job?
I haven't quite told the whole thing.
Well, that's as much as I know.
Well, after she'd had a discussion with me, she was highly trained as a cashier. The people said, well, dear, we better think about it over the weekend. Wouldn't you like to think about it? And Janice said, oh no, fine by me. This is a fine job for me. Well, you better think about it here over the weekend, and then you phone us up on Monday, or we'll phone you. So Janice said, well, as far as I'm concerned, this is perfectly okay by me. This job's fine. I don't know anything about records, but I know all about cash, and I know I can handle it. Monday, she waited for a call. There was no call. And then finally, about 11 o'clock, she phoned up and said, look, how about that job? Oh, dear, we thought you didn't want the job, so we gave it to somebody else. Now, if anything could be more phony than that.
We spend more money in a Vogue restaurant than any other single group in this damn city. And I'll bet you $1 that today or tomorrow there'll never be a black working there. Now, the issue involved there is, why don't kids feel they can apply at a place like this?
Don't you think that the reason why some of these kids feel so foreign when they go into the white establishments is because they don't see any black faces in there to serve them? So I think we're right back to the jobs. You just talk about the Vogue restaurant and they're not working there. I think these are some of the things. I had yet to see one Negro waitress in the city of Halifax, and I think is one of the most terminalist seen for the 2.5 years that I've been living here. And I see Negroes in all those restaurants eating chicken, eating chips, buying all sorts of things, and I haven't seen one Negro waitress yet. I have had girls apply to these restaurants on Gottingen Street right here for jobs. The sign in the window and the guy says no. And I've had a white girl go back and say yes, but of course she didn't want the job. But you see, they smile with you, and they say, we're sorry, we have no jobs. And the poor Negroes, they think that's cool, so they go up and spend another $1,000 in there. To me, that's a lot of damn nonsense.
My father was, he owns a casino taxi, and he was asked if a Negro could drive for him, right? And we all sat down and we agreed that the Negro could drive for him. And when he did, he got so many complaints from the other drivers and from the public that he had to fire him, not because he wanted to, but he had no choice for the sake of the business.
And I see in a situation like that all of the Negroes that are in this room get on the phone and they tie up the lines of the casino taxi and they put in phony calls. And the casino taxi can't operate unless they pick up fares off the street. Then they'll start to see what it means like if their phone's tied up, and they'll hire Negroes. This sort of thing. I looked for what? 6 months to find a place to live. I went to more places than...
So Roger Holness, before we start the panel, is going to do just a little bit of giving thanks and to acknowledge the lands that we're on.
Hello, my name is Roger Holness, and I am honored to have been chosen to introduce this symposium with a reminder about spirituality. As we gather to share in this symposium about working while black, let us remember that this region that we live, work, worship, and play are the territories of the First Nations peoples. We are gathered on the traditional territory of First Nations and Indigenous people, and the First Nations people's relationship with the land is at the center of their lives and spirituality. Therefore, we also acknowledge their stewardship of this land throughout the ages, and may we live in respect on this land and live in peace and friendship with its people. Also, we mustn't forget that this land is also occupied and inhabited by Indigenous Black African people. And their ancestral wisdom and resilience cannot be forgotten, and it must be acknowledged here as well. Scientists in quantum physics are telling us that everything is fundamentally one energy. So what's stopping some of us from perceiving and feeling this profound oneness and interconnectedness? Today, we gather to discuss issues of racism in the workplace, and this is not a reflection of oneness. Instead, racism is a clear reflection of separatedness and disconnection. Let's take a moment to recall some of the core values of the Afrocentric spiritual worldview. I've chosen 3 of them, and these include that the highest value of life lies in the interpersonal relationships between humans. Also, one should live in harmony with nature, and spirituality and inner divinity hold the most significance, not the acquisition of objects. Please join me in a moment of silence to pay respect to the Creator and our ancestors for the blessing of life that's been gifted to us, and to acknowledge with gratitude the responsibility that comes with this privilege. We are one people, and thank you for listening.
The way we're going to proceed is we're going to proceed with me speaking first, followed by Tina, then down the line, all the way down.
I mean, it's off, but I'm finding that it's, you might have to really talk into the micro, maybe you can adjust the big space.
Okay, so the way we're going to proceed is I guess, from your perspective, from left to right. Okay, which is beginning with me, Isaac Sini, followed by Tina Jeffers, Marlene Simmons, and then by Mohammed Jaffa. Okay, basically we're all going to address certain aspects of this topic. We're going to talk about very briefly, probably 10, 12 minutes at max. And I guess before anyone speaks, they'll probably give their own introductions. So my name is Isaac Saney. I'm the director of the Transition Year Program at Dalhousie University, who Dr. Burnley Rocky Jones, the late Dr. Burnley Rocky Jones, played a very important role in setting up. Hopefully I have a picture of him here, but we shall see what unfolds, right, with a short PowerPoint. I'm also a Cuba specialist, but I've also done a lot of writing on Black Nova Scotian history. So first I'd like to say that I appreciate the opportunity. I know there are others who know much more than me to speak about and provide what I will do is a sort of like a broad historical and perhaps socio-economic context for our discussion. I think it's also important that we're having this discussion here about racism in the workplace and particularly how it affects African Nova Scotians. One, as we entered the United Nations decade for people of African descent, some of you may not know this. We've been waiting a long time for the Canadian government to make some sort of declaration of what it will do in the official United Nations decade for people of African descent. It runs from 2014, so we're well over a year into it, into 2024. So we're in this decade, and I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things taking place. Also, as many of you know, we're approaching the 150th anniversary of the official creation of Canada on July 1st, 1867, with the British North American Act. So within this, discussions about what is the nature of Canada, is it this glorious state of equality, or is it a colonial settler state? And how do African Nova Scotians and other like indigenous peoples fit into this colonial state? I think we need to reflect on this instead of the kind of glorification that I think will unfold during the 150th anniversary. Those are sort of two key things to bear in mind, the UN decade and the 150th anniversary. First, I'd like to say, as I said before, that we have to look at the broad historical context of the Black Nova Scotian experience. First of all, as many may not know, slavery existed in Nova Scotia. There's a new book that just recently came out by Amani Whitfield. He did his PhD at Dalhousie. He's now in the University of Vermont in the United States, and he's published probably the most definitive treatment of slavery in Nova Scotia. I guess you don't have my PowerPoint, eh?
Showed it already.
Not sure, right? Oh, I was going to chat about the images on it, right? Yeah. Okay. So slavery existed in Nova Scotia, and I encourage you guys to read Dr. Ford Cooper's book, The Hanging of Angelique, which was nominated for Governor General, to look at the secret of slavery in Nova Scotia. So one important point, and actually go back to the first slide. Maybe the technological gremlins are intervening. Okay, so the first one.
That is the first one.
That is the first one?
Yeah.
Oh, for some strange reason. Anyway, I had pictures of slave ads as well as black loyalists and so forth. Because an important point to bear in mind is that when Black Nova Scotians and people of African descent came to Nova Scotia, it's not by some accidental fate of history. Quite often when we have Black History Month in February, it's often portrayed that if you tack Black Nova Scotians on to Nova Scotian history, or you didn't tack them on, Nova Scotian history would not be that much different. But one crucial things that have shaped it, and we can have this in discussion, is the role of black labor. Slavery is about the exploitation, the extreme of black labor, and there's a long history of that, right? And we've collected stories that puts of the flesh and blood human beings who suffered through the brutality of slavery in Nova Scotia. Perhaps we've watched 12 Years as a Slave, we've watched, for example, the Underground Railroad. I'm sure all of us are watching the Underground and so forth, but we don't realize slavery existed here as well. Also the black loyalists, and I have an image of the black loyalists, and here you see the three images here. The first one is there, the black loyalists, a very famous picture hanging in the Nova Scotia Art Gallery. But black loyalists coming here with hopes, dreams and hopes of freedom, dreams and hope of economic security, dreams and hope of self-determination, but being reduced to cheap labor. So we have one working there, sawing a log in construction, with black loyalists that cleared a lot of the land for the white loyalists. That's what the second image on top represents. But of course, an important point to bear in mind as well is in the face of these conditions of super exploitation as cheap labor and marginalization, okay, black people did not remain passive and helpless victims. They were active in their own liberation, and there down there is a portrayal of the Back to Africa movement of the Sierra Leone migration. So one of the important points is I'd like to make is that the history of discrimination has had and continues to have a profound socio-economic impact. So even though this is a history, okay, one of the things I'm going to tie into the education system, we see the consequences today. History is not bunk. Despite what some politicians will say, history is very important in shaping today's patterns. So for example, in a national housing survey of 2011, 34.8% of African Nova Scotians lived in low-income families, as opposed
opposed to 16.5% for Nova Scotians as a whole. So African Nova Scotians are twice as likely to live in poverty, okay, as white Nova Scotians. Is this accidental? Of course, when one looks at the history of discrimination, it isn't. In comparison, the average income for Nova Scotians was just over $42,000. For black Nova Scotians, $29,000. So that's a significant gap in income and earning potential. And of course, I don't want to take up too much time. When you disaggregate it between men and women, it becomes even worse when you factor in men. In 2011, African Nova Scotians had a rate of unemployment 14.5%, higher than the rest of Nova Scotia, and the figure is 9.9%. And African Canadians across Canada, 12.9%. So there's an interaction of race and class. Nova Scotians as a whole aren't doing well. But black Nova Scotians, those of African descent, are even doing significantly worse, right? So there's interaction between race and class. The gap is greatest, as I said, among males, with a rate in terms of unemployment of 17.2% for African Nova Scotians compared to 7.7% for Nova Scotians and 12.9% for African Canadians. The labor force participation rate for African Nova Scotians is 70.3% as compared to 74.9% for Nova Scotians as a whole. So as you can see, while the labor rate participation in Nova Scotia is low, we see it amplified among black Nova Scotians. And I think there's a link between what's unfolding in the employment, and we have anecdotal stories. What we really need is the funds to do a very serious socio-economic profile of the African Nova Scotian community, to go into the Prestons, to go into all the rural communities and actually find out what is the incomes, what is the wealth distribution, right? How are people doing? We need to have those facts, those figures. I've tried to get some of them from Canada, from the Census Canada figures, but they want to charge you thousands of dollars, right? We need to have this in order to present the facts on the table, in order to actually make the case for the state to provide the necessary funds to intervene. But of course, the state is not a neutral arbiter. The state has to be pressured, and in fact, the state has to be forced to do these things. And I think there's also a connection between these figures in the employment sphere and also in education. There's a direct link. And I always like to refer to this attitude in education, and of course, some of you read the article and the comments by Tina here on what's happening in the education system with the shall we say, the over-representation of African Nova Scotian students in suspension and so forth. And I think it's important to put this in historical context. So at Dalhousie, we just commissioned a scholarly panel to look into the legacy of Lord Dalhousie, who Dalhousie is named after, Dalhousie University is named after. In 1877, this is what he said about black Nova Scotians. These people, slaves by habit as well as education, no longer live under the dread of the lash. The idea of freedom is idleness, and they are therefore quite incapable of industry. Despite the fact of slavery, where blacks worked arduously and in horrible conditions and construction, despite the black royalists clearing the land, this was his attitude. And at one point, he wanted to send one of the migrations of black Nova Scotians, the black refugees, back to their slave masters in the United States. So what we see is a consequence of unequal education is reflected in the issue of the labor force and discrimination in the workplace and access of African Nova Scotians to well-paying jobs. African Nova Scotians are less likely to finish high school or attend university. In Nova Scotia in 1969, for example, only 3% of black students graduated from high school, and only 1% of those graduates attended university. In 1994, the last major study we had of the experience of African Nova Scotians' education system. In 1994, 60% of black youth in Nova Scotia aged 20 to 24 had not graduated grade 11, 30% had not graduated grade 10, and 10% had less than grade 9 education. I just have the figure of 30%, of 60% for grade 11 in 1994. The figures are even worse for grade 12. I don't actually have those figures, and for some reason it's not in the report. For the sake of time, I'm going to jump over a couple of things here. Only 18% of African Nova Scotians have a university education, compared to 20% of all African Nova Scotians aged 25 to 64 years. And I work in a transition year program. I worked in black organizations, and it's clear that African Nova Scotians are just as intellectually capable of performing at these levels as anybody else. The black community, however, has not remained passive. massive, and they've challenged this educational equity through the church in the 19th century and through a whole variety of organizations which I once spent time on, right? But it's interesting that, basically speaking, that the consequences of this unequal education, despite the struggle of the black community, continues to be particularly dramatic. Not only in the employability and access to proper jobs, but in what people now call this classroom to prison cell conveyor belt. And so while black Nova Scotians represent, the figures go up or down, that's why we need a comprehensive studies. Quite often, the state, the government agencies will deliberately underestimate the number of black Nova Scotians in the province as a way to justify less resources. We need to know how many brothers and sisters, how many African Nova Scotians are in this province. But a usual figure that's bandied about is that black Nova Scotians represent 2.3% of the population. According to official figures, we represent 2.3% of the population of Nova Scotia, yet we make up 18% of those who go through the prison system. Okay? So there is this connection that exists. Because, and the last point I make is, the point is this, and I always remember, there's this quote from somebody who was involved in what people normally call criminal activity. And what is criminal is often defined by the state. I mean, people who, the big bankers who make decisions that ruin people's lives, they're not criminalized. Okay, so we have to be very careful. It's the state who determines what's criminal activity. But there was this person in Brazil, and he was a brother, and he was saying, I'm on the right side of the wrong life, okay? So the point is that if people aren't given the skills, the tools by which to compete in this society, if I was in their situation, and this society is ruled by the nexus of cash and money, I will find other ways to acquire that. So I think this is important. So we've created a sort of a process that I think in many cases is deliberate. You can see it in the United States, to channel black Nova Scotians. First, we were super exploited in slavery and as cheap labor by the black race, and I could go into a long description of that process, to marginalization, okay? And quite often the way you deal with populations you wish to marginalize is to imprison them. But at the end of the day, black Nova Scotians have not remained helpless and quiet and passive. They've fought, they've organized, they've united with allies, as we see here, to try and transform the situation, not only in their better interests, but also in the interest of the society as a whole. And I'll stop there.
You're right that we have to always remember that there has been resistance, and that although we know these inequities exist, people are always actively working to sort of combat the racism that exists in our society. My name is Tina Roberts-Jeffers. I am a stay-at-home mom to 3 beautiful small children, a 5-year-old, a 2, almost 3-year-old, and a 3-month-old. And so today I'm going to talk about racism and sexism and how they are interconnected, particularly from the experience of a black woman. In 1982, Gloria Hull published a book titled All the Women Are White, All the Blacks Are Men, but Some of Us Are Brave. And that book mainly focused on the lack of academic work and studies in terms of black women, whether it be in history or sociology or any of a number of fields. But it really touches on the idea that oftentimes when we're having discussions and conversations on racism or on sexism, black women are sometimes forgotten, and the particular experience of black women rather isn't always examined. And so my comments today are going to be a combination of some data and things that I found out in terms of looking for information on the experience of black women, but also just a reflection on my own life and the life of my mother and grandmother and the people that I know in terms of some of the family history research I've done. So when I enter spaces sometimes, I have a t-shirt, and it says, it's one of those t-shirts that gets printed up all the time. It says, "This is what a feminist looks like." And sometimes that's a very provocative thing to say, especially as a black woman. And the reason that it's provocative is related to the history of racism that has existed sometimes among feminist movements in terms of ignoring the experience of Black women and how that relates. And so I meet a lot of Black women who I think have extremely, who embody feminism to me, but reject that label, and it's connected to the relationship that we have with one another. And so I guess my intention in talking today is to be as accessible as possible and share information. Motherhood is the primary frame through which I see issues of gender equity, so I'll talk about motherhood a lot throughout my talk. Okay. So the first theme that I want to touch on is one that Isaac sort of touched on already, which is education. And so I do a lot of advocacy work in education. And I go to the school board and to the province and ask them all the time for data. And the data that we get, we'll get information that tells us how girls are doing. We'll get information that tells us how Black students are doing as a whole. But we rarely, if ever, get information that tells us about how Black girls or Black boys specifically are doing. And Black girls and Black boys have different experiences in school. There are, recently, I want to say maybe a year or two, they put forward a new policy on harassment. And so I've talked to young Black girls who are harassed in school, and then they have a very, loud resistance to that harassment. And what happens is they end up being disciplined for the loud resistance to the harassment, and the person who did the harassing is not disciplined in the same way. And especially as a Black girl, the attention is on them. And so they are, in society as a whole, already over-sexualized, not allowed to just be girls. And then when they get to school, they're reprimanded for being the victims of harassment as opposed to the people who are perpetrating that. And that's something that's very hard to capture in data. That's something that's very hard when they just release suspension information and they'll tell you a general category, insubordination or violence or something like that as a part of the whole report hasn't come out yet, but they put people into categories like that, and it's very hard to talk to girls about their experience without becoming sort of frustrated and not knowing exactly how to proceed when the system responds to having data presented in a certain way. And so one of the ways that I think people of African descent in general communicate with one another is through the building of relationships. And it's not necessarily something that's easy to do without putting in a lot of work. Like, you have to work at it. You have to have events like this. You have to come out. You have to engage in dialogue. And so moving on to something like justice, we hear a lot, like recently the report was just released that stated the overrepresentation of Black people within the system. But that overrepresentation, again, didn't address the specific experiences of Black women. And when you're thinking about something like justice, you also have to think about the experience of Black women who have partners who are involved in the justice system, who are then lone parents. There was a report put out in March from StatsCan about women in Canada, and it focused on visible minority women. And so this is sort of like an exception. It's based off of the data that they collected in 2011. And it talks about how Black women are more likely to live in households where they are lone parents, is what they call single parenting. And so if you have situations where women as lone parents are also making less money, Isaac gave some statistics. Black women make the least amount on average of just about every group in Nova Scotia. Black women make considerably less than white women, and they make considerably much more less than Black men and white men as well. And so when you have those two things compounded, women who are supporting their families as single parents and subject to the lower income that women make within society, then you have a specific effect that you would think requires specific actions, specific policy measures to make sure that women are getting access to the things that they need to get access to. But that's not the case. Even though Black women are receiving college degrees, Black women are, like all visible minority women, receiving college degrees, especially Canadian-born Black women, at just about an equal or greater rate than Canadian-born women of different races, and that's something that this report covers. Yet and still, we're earning less money. Yet and still, we're not able to have the same amount of disposable income for things like investing in retirement, for things like buying a house, purchasing life insurance. And that's what I like to have people think about when they're thinking about the income gap. That's that much less money that we have to put away for our kids for university. That's that much less money that we have to make the types of investments that build wealth. And for Black women, it's not just the income gap, like just being a visible minority causes an income gap, but being a woman compounds that income gap. And it's something that we, I think, should have more conversations about. The last thing that I'll talk about is political engagement. I have a particular theory that you cannot be a revolutionary if you can't even take care of the people in your own family. And so that, to me, is very important. So that has an impact though, right? So who is going to cook dinner? Who is going to pick up the kids? Who is going to do all of that unpaid labor of home in addition to the community labor? And so I feel like I'm very fortunate. I have a partner who is, who is without blinking an eye says, of course I'll stay home with the children while you go out to this event today. Well, our families all live in different places in Toronto, and his family is in Toronto, and I'm American, so my family is in the States, and so they're a bit out of reach. But that is important. If you aren't able to pull your weight at home, then like that impacts how you're able to engage publicly. And so Black women have a harder time sometimes getting out into the political arena because that involves having a support system, not only the wealth to be able to do that, the type of job stability and so forth that oftentimes comes with being able to run for office, but also the type of interpersonal support that comes with that. And so I am a big fan of trying to, be aware of accountability for myself, how am I interacting with my family, and accountability for how I'm acting with the community. And so I think I will wrap it up there. I hope that what I said, I hope that you understand, and I look forward to the conversation that we'll have. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Marlene Ruck Simmons, and I'm pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. The context that I am going to center is that of post-secondary education, because I think for me that is one of the places in which racism and oppression is allowed to hide. The sense is that these are institutes of higher learning, and so they are the places where there's critique and there's inquiry and there's growth that is allowed to happen. And yes, all of those things do exist, but there is also a place where racism exists and is nurtured. And I'm able to speak of that from many different perspectives, having been a student, an individual who's gone through the system, but also as someone who has been employed and is presently employed within those institutions. So I have, I guess, different perspectives from which to engage. I want to actually just begin by reading something that I had written when I was a student, because you were talking about, it's interesting, we began with the history, and then I think what you helped us do, Tina, was get a sense of what does it mean in terms of some of the identities. And so what I will share with you is my perspective as a Black woman of West Indian descent. I'm from Sydney, Nova Scotia, Whitney Pier, and my grandparents came here. They chose to come here during the early part of the 18th century. 20th century, thank you, in the early 1900s. So that was a deliberate choice on 3/4 of my ancestors. My mom's family is from Hammond's Plains, but that's my history. And so I'll read just very briefly. Today I arrived at university eager to undertake graduate studies, only to be blatantly reminded that I must make a space as no space has been given to me. Not in what was said, but rather in what was not spoken. It was a reminder that visions of blackness were not coached in the warmth of my heritage, but rather mangled in the violent representations of those who do not know me. I was to be that which they dreaded, feared, and loathed. Emerging from this prison once again rests within the spirituality of my being. The knowing that that which knows me has fashioned me and strengthened me is capable of raising me above the representative fables. It reminds me of those who have gone before me to create that space, visionaries who have walked the path. I'm endowed with courage to speak, name, and stand. So each day I'm reminded of my blackness and otherness. It is thrown at me as an emblem of disgrace and shame, yet I choose not to wear my unique ebony skin with pride and growing awareness that comes from the adornment of truth that we are strong yet perpetuated to be weak, that they were all knowledgeable, yet we are portrayed as stoops. And in our history, stoops is a word that represents people of ignorance, people of not knowing, waiting to be filled and gifted with wisdom. So within postmodern societies, the politics of identities, and we're talking specifically about Black identities, continues to be an arena of deep contestation and deliberation. Those who engage in the battle wrestle for the right to counter more accurate and culturally affirming representations amidst shifting and discounting portraits and images. The act of self-identification, in my opinion, is therefore a political endeavor that must be undertaken and taken up regularly and daily. It's a political endeavor, and it's capable of unsettling these foreign descriptions because they do not know us, they are not us, that are devoid of truths and experiences. It is also an act of remembering and of validating spaces of importance which have shaped and given meaning to my life as an individual and collective being. The struggle to take back and decree is an ongoing project of decolonization to erase the mark of whiteness and thereby reveal the civility must be demonstrated rather than claimed. Each day is entered into with an awareness that I must either speak or risk being spoken for by those whose knowledge is framed within deviant constructions of difference. A process which necessitates that I actively challenge readings of the world by writing myself into the histories of the present. This task is arduous. It takes energy. I think, Tina, you spoke so eloquently of the currencies that you need to have in order to exist as a Black woman. And those same currencies are needed within post-secondary education or education in general. It is necessary to reclaim an accurate and healthy self and communal representation. Existing in education takes strength, it takes risk, and it takes honor. Because we are constantly being exposed to systems, processes, events, encounters, perceptions, beliefs, and assumptions of who we are or who other people think we are, or who others beforehand may have been. I like what one particular person I had an opportunity to work with said. It's a game. You have to be able to maneuver yourself around. You can't ostracize, you can't burn all your bridges because you need those bridges to get back over. Strategically, skillfully to make those changes. Step by step, you have to address the issues in a soft yet meaningful way because there are strongholds and power dimensions that people don't want to give up. but there is skill in doing this. The advocacy comes in, I think, affirming that people who are part of the educational system actually have power, because the myth is that you are powerless or we are powerless, that we are empty vessels waiting to be filled. And so as one person said, that they advocate for parents getting back their authority, which is what you just said, their power, and taking back what it is that they do have in support of their families or in support of their own lives. So it must be a conscious act, but it also has to be very strategic, because as the other individual says, we have to be careful in this work of anti-oppression or anti-racism that we are building bridges. The pressure is to create further distance, to assume that everybody in the struggle looks like us, feels like us, is us. We have to be able to represent not only ourselves, but to recognize that other people are also part and have been part of this struggle. And I think that's what we saw in the opening video. That there are other people who are equally concerned with the oppressions that exist in society. And for me, that is so critically important. Because other people are in positions of power, and they also need to be able to take forward what it is that we're talking and sharing. But certainly, by all means, we need to be able to listen to those voices that are least heard. Thank you.
You still have a few minutes. You still have a few minutes. That's at 3 minutes.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mohammed Yafa. I am originally from Sierra Leone. Sini put that in the context that he spoke of. And I've been living here for 16 years. I live here with my family, and I struggle along. So, the folks around the table have spoken very eloquently about most of what you can talk about when you sit in a panel like this, and that's the art of being the last person to speak. You have to scratch some things that you already put on paper. So I'm going to try to have something out. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about some practical things like being in the job while you're working. So I think I'm going to be the only person talking about working while black. And then I'll talk a little bit about, I'm a Muslim, practicing Muslim. I'm going to talk about religion. And it's hard to take religion out of black folks or black folks out of religion. I believe, I don't know about others, but if you throw a black man off plane, he's not going, oh, nothing, he'll go, oh, God. And living with that in an environment that is not, it's not directly hostile, but it's not open and accommodating, not doing any initiative, it's another struggle. If I get there, I will talk a little bit about that in my experience. It's not an awful one, but I'm privileged to some extent, so maybe just how I got to being able to live my religion while at work. Now I'll talk a little bit about ethnicity, because being from the continent, I believe I'm sensing it's a little different. How you connect and how people look at you, and even how the system treats you is different. And if I get there as well, within the next now 8 minutes, I will talk about that. If not, maybe during the discussions. So Marlene mentioned about other people being part of the struggle. I'm going to start there. One of the things that I do, I work for the health system, and I do the diversity program for the province now. And one of the things that I do is educate, and sometimes it's to help leadership strategize to get an outcome of providing equitable health for all populations, especially those who are underserved and marginalized. And when I give education, one thing I hear people say is, we have a great hope for the coming future generation. Because you see black kids and white kids and Arab kids, everyone in the system together. The white kids have black friends, the black kids have white friends, and so on and so forth. And at first I would listen to that and think, oh yeah, that's something we should hope for. But then it hit me that the person who is going to give those black kids and those white kids job is not the black kids and the white kids, it's us. So the kids get along very fine. And they can even be in one another's houses and so on. But when they go to apply for a job, they find us and who is behind the table. And we are applying the lenses that have been applied to us adults are going to be applied to our kids again. So you're going to see all the time the same people hiring themselves over and over and over again, and the change is not going to happen. Except if we intentionally and deliberately try to change that. So one of the things that I do within the health system is work on employment equity. Employment equity is about creating programs that will level the playing field for everybody. So people who are marginalized historically would have a chance, not to give favor, but it's to break the barriers. Because one thing that is happening that we know for sure, and studies and statistics have proven it, is that when you send your resume and you are a black person and your name sounds black, I don't know how black names sound, if names have sounds and that way, but it is proven. If your name is different, for the sake of just this discussion, I would say, if your name is not like John Smith, I'm sorry if there's any John Smith in the room, I didn't mean you in person. If your name doesn't sound like John Smith or Matthew McDonald or something like that, and your name ends like with, say, African Nova Scotian names like Simmons or anything that will give a clue that you do not belong to the majority, your chances of being called for an interview drop. That's the reality, and it was proven in Toronto. I think they took 100 resumes, all identical, and made 100 copies of the same resumes, so they're identical, and put names, the like of which I mentioned earlier, and then put other names that sound Arabic, typical African or African Canadian, and send them out. And you guess what happened? Yeah, so the ones that sounded familiar to the ones that have the jobs and give the job, got the jobs and got the calls. So it's a big struggle. So some of the things that I do at work is to try to break those barriers. So we have created within the system a self-identification, and that took a long time coming because it is scary to self-identify. Right, because when you self-identify is maybe you are putting yourself out for further marginalization. If you say I'm black or I'm Aboriginal or I'm immigrant, so that might even be a tool for marginalizing you further. But what we did was we talked to our HR department that if somebody self-identifies, their resumes must be looked at, and if they meet the criteria for the job, it must be sent forward to the manager. And if they do, if the manager receives it, they must interview. And if they interview, they must hire if the person does well in the interview and are not too far from the top. For example, if they are second and they only miss the first place by 5%, they should be given the job. And we're attributing, we came to that decision because we know when you come to a job interview and you are the person who looks different from everybody else that is interviewing you, there are elements of intimidation there and lack of familiarity, and that might drop your confidence, which might not make you hit where you need to be. So therefore, that 5% may compensate for that, it may not. I would go for 20, but nobody will listen, right? So we have that. But even beyond that is folks don't apply for the job because the trust has been lost for a very long time. You know, you can finish your education and apply for the first job. Father did apply, mother applied, your sister applied, your brother applied, they didn't get a job. What will give you the incentive to apply? Why would you trust the system? So when you ask the people within the system, they say, well, we can't hire them if they don't apply. You know, if we can't hire them if they don't apply. And if they don't graduate, they don't meet our criteria. So one thing we did is to go to communities and create the trust. And one way we did that was in collaboration with Dalhousie University and others, and bringing in grade 9 to grade 12 students from the school system into a forum every year, and bringing folks, black folks that are professionals within the health system to come and speak to them about their experiences and how good it is for them to actually go into health professions. And that really proved, one of the first session was held in this room. And 70% of the kids that attended it said that they would choose health as a career option in their studies going forward. And my daughter was in this room, and she told me, she said that, I thought I wanted to be a doctor. I thought the only way you could actually be a health professional is to be a doctor. It was, I think, grade 7, grade 8. I brought him because of privilege that I carry with me because I was part of the thing. So and I was allowed, because that was a joke. So in yeah, I know privilege, yeah, as if I have one. So I do have some, you know. So, but the thing is, even the stress of being a doctor was relieved that day from my daughter's back. So it makes sense for us to have conversations, and 70% of the kids did that. And that year, the following year, Dalhousie University School of Health Professions, which has been there for, I think, 200-something years, got the highest number of black folks, black kids applying to the School of Health Professions. Wow. For something as simple as just building people's confidence, right? So, and prior to that, when people will just say, well, we cannot hire them if they don't apply, but what is our role? Because we are all the same. The education is related to health, it's related to justice, it's all interrelated. But it's a very convenient way of just brushing the issue off your back and say, that's not my issue, that's an educational issue. So I think we have to collaborate very strongly to look at this issue. This. How much longer do I have? 4 seconds. 2 seconds. So yeah, I think since we have some discussions coming up, I thought I would just hit on that point. We keep it there for now. But if you allow me, I'm going to say one single thing that relates to our black community. When we set this program up, we wanted to go to all the other communities and see what they have to prepare the people of those populations for the jobs. We found that the black community is the one that didn't have any system in place. There is no employment preparation or a program to get our kids ready so that when the job comes, they will just step into it. And I think that is something we must advocate for. At least we have to prepare ourselves. So if it comes, we handle it and take it by the horn. Thank you.
Thank you so very much to our panelists, Isaac, Tina, Marlene, and Mohammed. My name is Ben Sisha. I'm a member of Solidarity Halifax. I'm also a high school teacher in Dartmouth, and part of the organizing committee to put this together, and with Working Well Black more generally. Let's just take a quick second. Could the others who are involved in organizing please just stand up and be acknowledged? So Palami Jones up front, Adjo Atwell in the back, Roger Holness as well, Matthew Byard, and Elisa Gerhardt, and also Hillary Lindsay and Jillian Thorpe, who couldn't be here today. So we will be moving into small groups shortly, but we do have an extra minute or two, so maybe just if there's 1 or 2 general questions for our panelists before that, we might take a couple, and we will have, what we're going to do is we will be moving into small groups, which will be facilitated here by 4 volunteers who have agreed to help us today. So we'll introduce them in a minute, and then after that we will be coming back together at the end to sort of discuss where to go from here and some next steps. But is there a general good sort of meaty question to lead us into the groups before we start? I see one, and some other wheels turn in people's heads. Okay, I don't know. Falami, you want to choose? I don't want to choose. Falami, you can choose. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you can take your mics that way. Maybe Archie, I'd love to give community the first voice.
Hi, my name is Archie. Can you hear me?
Maybe you have to come up front so we can use the mic. Yeah. Come up front. You can use Ben's mic.
Yeah. If I'd have known how to go through all this, I'd
I don't know if it's more, I think it's more of a comment than a question. But growing up as a black man, African Nova Scotian man, in a predominantly black community, working in white organizations and predominantly white institutions, it's very hard to really be your authentic self. So my question to the panel is, how do we, as African Nova Scotians, as people of African descent, who want to be our authentic self, working in white institutions, how do we do that without selling ourselves and forgetting who we are as African Nova Scotians for the sake of the organization, while at the same time trying to work for our black community and our black organizations? In a lot of times we're one of, or there's probably two, so there's not a whole mass of us, which makes it that much harder to really be your authentic self.
That's a very big question. I think it needs a whole session like this. I'm not kidding, really. I see it when you meet folks of African descent at work. You don't even want to say hi to each other because you don't want to give the impression that this is about blackness, right? So I meet people. I try to look folks in their eyes, and I get avoided. And you may have experienced that. If you're not from the same village, you don't know each other, you just want to stay away so people don't look at you. So you can't live authentically. You are burning to say, hey brother, hey sister, how are you doing? You just can't do it. And so we leave a lot of things aside just for us to be accepted within the establishment, right? One thing we don't talk about, on those slave boats, at any point in time, there were about 70 to 70% of Muslims in there. You can't even bring the word Muslim to an African Nova Scotia or African Canadian. We just want to avoid anything that will look at us, that will put us in those places, right? We can't create affinity groups within our organizations, so we're trying to fit in, and it's a hard way of living. That's my realization.
Well, first, because I work in the education field, I'm the director of the transitional program, and so I want to sort of put this in the context of a tidbit I forgot to mention in my presentation, but I think it's very important to bear in mind. The first Education Act in Nova Scotia was passed in 1811, if I'm correct. And it basically involved de facto segregation. They established financial barriers for access to education from African Nova Scotian communities that they couldn't reach. And education, and then eventually put it into law. And education wasn't officially desegregated until 1954. So that's 43 years of official segregated education in Nova Scotia. So that means African Nova Scotians have been living twice as long under segregated education than unsegregated education, because it's only 62 years. And I think that needs to be borne in mind when we think about the trials and tribulations and the cost of this segregated and racist education system. Now, I'm the director of the transition year program, at Dalhousie University. And right now, I'll be honest, we share a tremendous amount of goodwill from the administration. I work very well with the dean, I work very well with the vice president, and I work very well with the president. That's because right now it's the flavor of the moment, access and diversity, at least rhetorical and lip service to it. But I have to rely, and you often have to rely on certain well-meaning individuals to be there. So if they retire and move on, is there any institutional guarantee? And then you have to put up with a tremendous amount of condescension, right? Okay, and I put up with a lot of condescension, which I won't go into the details in public, where you basically have to bite your tongue, because normally if I was a director, I'd tell them to go blankety blank, 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 right? Okay, because I've done it, I have a very hot temper. But in my capacity as being responsible for a program that was started by Dr. Bernie Rocky Jones, that has graduated now more than 15 nurses, okay? And also dental hygienists, the first African Nova Scotian with a Masters of Architecture. I have to defend the program, but there's a lot of stuff you have to put up with. But also we have the space, because I'm also an academic and a scholar, of academic freedom. And we just formed at Dalhousie because in order to express ourselves as we want to, as authentically as people of African descent, whether you're from the historical African Nova Scotian indigenous black community or new people of African descent arriving, you need collective power. And we just formed the Black Faculty, the first in Canada, a Black Faculty and Staff Caucus. Okay? And that has given us the power because the president is frightened. I mean, I shouldn't say this. They're frightened of what's going to happen, right? So, for example, what happened in Princeton? How did we end up with this Lord Dalhousie panel? It's because what was happening at Princeton University over the racist legacy of Woodrow Wilson. We said there's a possibility here. Look at Lord Dalhousie. So one of the things we've been able to do is create this collective organization, right? Where collectively we now have the strength. We don't individually stand alone. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to organize, and there are allies who stand with us as well. So I always believe in organization. We need to become organized, and through organization comes our strength and our ability not only to fight for our rights, but also to collectively reflect who we are authentically, as Archie said.
1 minute, sister. 1 minute.
I promise. And then I think we might have to wrap up and have some quick snacks, and then our small groups where those questions that you had can come up with.
Yes. So I just want to, in response to your question, Archie, I feel like I ask myself that question often, and what I feel like happens as a function of racism and sexism to a certain extent, for me as a black woman, my ability to be fully human is sort of curtailed by the expectations of other people. So I don't get to just be a person walking down the street. I walk down the street as a black woman, have people crossing over to the other side of the street, grabbing their child's hand, things like that. I don't get to just, take a stroll. I don't get to just, be offended by something that happens to me. That is all, a process of my humanity, my very natural, and black people are expected to sort of not get angry. Being angry is a human emotion. We are human like everyone else, but we are expected to hold that in, to always perform a certain way in public. And so I guess when I think about the answer to your question, what I think to myself is, one, I give myself permission to be hurt, and then I also give myself permission to resist in whatever way I feel is necessary in that situation. And so I think that we have to not limit ourselves to a specific response, but to be comfortable with the fact that just like everyone else, we're fully human, and sometimes we make mistakes just like anybody else makes mistakes. Sometimes we get really angry, and maybe we shouldn't have got angry, but that's what people do. Sometimes people get angry, or we make sometimes we're hurt, and I feel like we need to just be comfortable with acknowledging that hurt, but not let that stop us from going out and still trying to combat racism or sexism.
Very quickly, I guess what I wanted to add is that, we're working in places where there is spiritual injury that happens. So we get injured spiritually. And it is a protective mechanism, very healthy, for us to then figure out how much of myself do I expose and share in those spaces. Do they have the right Or do they have the privilege of knowing me in all of my entirety? Absolutely, in my home, in my family, in my community. But I think as an individual, I have to make that conscious decision around how much of me do they have access to? And so when I think of things from that perspective, then I have the power and I decide how much of me do you really need to see in this circumstance. And with that in mind, then I can make the decision on a context basis, depending on who I'm talking to, where I'm at, what the agenda is, quite similar to what Isaac was saying, then there will be parts of me that will get expressed and get seen. But that does not give you the right to me. You know, that sense of ownership that was lost in that enslavement period, that does not give you the right to be able to see and understand all of me. You might know parts of me, and those are parts of me that I choose to express. So I think for me, that is the authenticity. You know, it's not the same in every situation, it's not the same in every context, and different contexts draw out things of me, and sometimes things I don't even know are in me, right? But things that I need to share or bring forward. Thank you.
Thank you all. Some good dialogue. I think we're gonna just. Can I say something? You guys are making it real hard on me. I just want to say, okay? I'm trying.
I'm not going to be able to stay for the entire event, so I just wanted to make a couple of comments. My name is Charla Williams, and I've worked in employment equity and diversity for more years than I'd care to remember. And when I first took the position, I'm thinking like, okay, let's go inside the organizations and make a change from within and make a difference. And what I've realized over the years is that that's not effective. That's not effective because I used to think they were doing things to us, and what I realized is they don't think about us, all right? There's nobody plotting to keep black people down. They just don't think about black people. They don't include black people, all right? And one of the things that I think has to happen in order to make a change, because those same people who said, oh, our children will make a difference, are the same people that we went to school with, who said, oh, this is terrible, what's happening, and we need to do something about it. It'll be different when we get in positions. They're in the positions now, there's no difference, okay? The experience that I've seen of people working in the workplace, they're fine in entry-level positions, but as soon as they want to go up the ladder, all of a sudden that's when things happen. I don't know if anybody had the chance to read a book in the 90s that was called The Rage of a Privileged Class. And it was about the fact that they interviewed African Americans from Fortune 500 companies who had really been climbing the ladder. And what they realized is as they got into higher positions, the racism changed. It was still there, but it looked different. So if they were used to addressing the issues that they had to address when they were at lower levels, all of a sudden things got a little different. And the same is true, I've done some work with police and RCMP, and they talk about as long as they're constables, everybody's fine, but as soon as they go for promotion, that's when stuff happens. So what has to happen, in my opinion, is we need to address employers. And people in positions of authority and decision makers need to be the ones in the room. I look around the room and everybody in the room is either committed to making a change or the victims of what's going on. And unfortunately, we don't have the ability to change this system, these systems. So I really think that we have to find effective ways to address employers and bring them in the room and ask them the questions, because it is, in my opinion, having worked in cultural competency for quite a few years, it is their own assumptions and biases. When we walk in the room, they have beliefs about who we are and what we're going to be like. And they react to that. They, like Marlene said, they don't know us. They don't take the time to know us. And they really don't care who we are as long as we're a body who's going to do good work for them. They're happy, but they don't realize everything that we have to go through in order to do that work. So I really hope as you go into your small groups, I don't know what your themes are, but I really hope you get a chance to address strategies around bringing the employers into the room and having them make commitments, because we had back in the 90s, we had Nova Scotia Employment Equity Practitioners Association, and I think the only, I shouldn't say the only, but a major mistake we made is we didn't insist on quotas. okay? We wanted to work with timetables and targets and all of that. But had we put quotas in place in this province, it would be a different story than what we're seeing today. So I thank you very much for letting me hijack that.
So we'll get some food. One just quick thing, when we do come back to the groups, remember we're intentional. So let's try and be very integrated in our groups, not like how we are right now. And if you see that it's not as mixed up, get up and get uncomfortable and move to another seat. Okay, so about 10 minutes or so.